Okay, welcome to the regular Attleboro School Committee meeting of Monday, July 20th, 2020. This is your reminder that this meeting is being electronically recorded. I want to thank all the school committee members and administrators for being here tonight, and also those of you watching online, thank you for joining us. First item on our agenda tonight is the report of the superintendent. So for that, I'll turn it over to Superintendent Sawyer.
Sorry about that. Let me try it again. Thank you, Chairman Withers. Wanted to update the committee on our efforts to prepare for a reopening this fall. The first thing I wanted to speak to was the survey that we conducted just prior to 4th of July. In fact, we sent that out ahead of the 4th of July weekend, and it was open until about midweek that following week. In publishing the results, it became very clear that there were issues in the delivery of the survey in some of our schools. We're disappointed to find out that not all parents did receive the survey via email. It was on social media pretty widely, but not everybody is on Facebook. So we know that and expect everyone to receive that via email, and that was not the case. So I wanted to acknowledge that we had some problems with that we're going to make sure do not happen moving forward. In fact, this is one of the reasons why we've invested in Remind as a communication solution for the district as a whole this coming school year. We're very excited about that system, and we think it's going to help us to do a better job. But that implementation is going to start sometime in August. So that doesn't really help us with this situation. So I just wanted to put it on everybody's radar that that survey was just an initial read on things. We are going to be doing another survey either at the end of next week or the beginning of the following week. So end of July, early August. And so for people that were concerned that they didn't get a chance to chime in on the survey that we conducted previously, there is going to be another one. We'll do a better job of making everyone aware that it's coming. We'll also make sure that everyone receives it via email. And hopefully we'll have fewer problems in just literally the administration of it. That said, it was a very simple survey. We wanted to get a read on things. And as I'm sure you all reviewed, the clear message for us is that there is a significant number of families who expect and are counting on us to return in person if that is safe in the fall. I think from the reaction to that, we know that there are also a not insignificant number of people who have concerns about that one way or the other. So, you know, I think we can all understand that is in an issue as complicated as this one, where various people have different concerns and demands on their own lives. There's not going to be a solution that is universally accepted as being, you know, the perfect solution. We understand that, and what we're going to have to do is make sure that in weighing all of our choices, we are being mindful of not only what a majority wants, but also keep in mind the concerns for those who aren't in that majority. And the people who end up on the other side of that, whatever it is, when we get there, you know, I hope that people will feel like we've heard what their concerns are and have found a way to address them in some other way. But again, the big takeaway for us was that there's a pretty significant number of people who are looking to send their kids back in person with restrictions. But you know, we do know that there is some percentage of parents who are not going to send their children back to school under any circumstances. So both those populations exist in numbers that were pretty close to what we were expecting. So the next thing I wanted to say, moving off the survey and onto our planning, the commissioner has explicitly stated that he does not want districts making decisions about the fall at this time. There are too many weeks between now and then. It's too fluid, too many things can change. We would be ahead of ourselves if we declared how things were going to be at that time, considering how much time there is between now and then. So we are honoring that that directive, and we actually agree that it's the smart thing to do. So the perception that somehow there's been some sort of decision made is inaccurate. We will be waiting until August to make any sort of decision about what our intentions are for the start of school. As many people are aware, the state is requiring that we have 2 submissions, a preliminary, very simple set of information that we have to answer for July 31st, which describes how we will handle the district under the 3 different scenarios that the state is asking for, which is remote, which means that we're not in school, in person with restrictions, which is being in school, but practicing social distancing and taking other precautions, and then what they refer to as hybrid, which is something in between those 2 things, where there are some people in school for in-person learning on a given day and others who are home remote, and that those people switch, right? So those are the three different scenarios that we have to prepare for. On the 31st, we have to give a preliminary description of what that's going to look like here in the district. And then on August 10th, we have to give a more detailed description of that and describe which one we're anticipating for September. So, and for us, it's really late August. So at that, we won't be making a decision until that time. And that's why I say nothing has been decided until August. Now, we have begun planning. We've been planning, basically since June on a certain level. But I want to note there's a lot of information that we do not yet have from the state that makes it hard to say definitively where we're leaning and how things are going to work out. We do not know the state's guidance on transportation. So that's a pretty significant thing in terms of our planning for the fall. We don't know what the guidelines are, and we don't know about our ability to meet those. So there's a lot of details that are still out there that we haven't been told about, and so we're planning, but we're also cautiously waiting for some information that'll help to really flesh out the details of those plans. Today we had our first district meeting of our reopening committee, and that includes our partners in the AEA, also included our local public health officials. So that's going to be a collaborative effort between the city and our employees and the administration to put together the details that are going to drive how the district operates. The big thing that I wanted to impress upon both the committee and anyone listening at home at this time is that there seems to be a lot of hysteria around which of the 3 modes, as I like to call them, we're going to be starting with come the start of the school year. But the point that I wanted to make is that you almost have to think of this as school in 2 different modes. One being in person without restrictions, which is what school used to look like, which is what we were doing back on March 13th and haven't done since, right? That kind of schooling is not going to come back until the virus is in the rearview mirror. And I don't even really know what that means exactly, because I used to think, well, when we have a vaccine, that'll be when we can go back to normal. But I think there's reason to now worry that it might not be right away, even under that. So the traditional learning that the in-person without restrictions, that is off the table. The state is not allowing that. The state requires that we meet the guidance that they've set for us. And so in-person for the foreseeable future can only mean with restrictions. So, when people say, that they don't agree with wearing masks, we can have a conversation about masks if you want, but I personally do not have any leeway. If I'm going to let people back in the building, they're going to have to follow the guidelines set by the state. And that is something as a district that we don't have choice over. So there's that, in person without restrictions, which is off the table. And then there's what we have to face moving forward, which is a situation in which, as a district, we have to simultaneously plan to be able to operate in different situations. So these 3 plans are not 3 distinct realities, and we're going to pick one and live that way. It's really important that we think of them as 3 parallel tracks that we're going to be transitioning in and out of based on the conditions here in Attleboro. So whether or not we're in person or in a hybrid or fully remote is completely dependent on our ability to keep our employees and our students safe, right? And we have been asked by the governor and by the commissioner to do everything in our power to safely bring back students in person. And we agree with the thinking there that there's no better way to educate kids than in person, and that for their healthy development, being in school with us is what we want. That being said, just like back in March, we made decisions that wasn't in their best interest for everyone's safety to conduct school in person. It could happen again that here in Attleboro, the conditions require that we make some changes. And so, we always have the remote option if there's a second spike here and, the transmission rate starts going up at an alarming rate, we can go back to that. But based on the conditions in the state and in both, Bristol County as a whole and here in Attleboro, there's reason to be optimistic that if we take the necessary precautions set by the state, we can bring people back safely in person. And we won't necessarily be switching in and out of that mode as a district as a whole. It's possible that based on conditions in a given school, we might have one particular school has to go remote because there was an outbreak in that particular community, or it's possible that we're finding that there was a greater infection rate amongst, say, high schoolers, and we have to go remote at the high school, but we can continue to have students at the elementary level still in person. So it's not one size fits all. We're not making a decision that we're going to live with for the entire year. We're trying to create a system in which, for those students who are going to come back to us, that we can switch from in-person to hybrid to remote as needed, as often as we need to make sure that we're maintaining everybody's safety. And this is where I want to pause and say, for the people that are really worried about that, while we don't have good details from the state exactly how much leeway we have to do so, we know that there are going to be some number of families who do not send their kids back to us, either for very specific health reasons or just out of a general concern. And that's going to be allowable, and we're going to make arrangements so that families who do not wish to send their kids back are going to be able to get educated by the Attleboro Public Schools in a way that is different from the way we're going to handle the people who choose to come back in person. So I know that there's been a lot of anxiety among families who, for different reasons, are very, very hesitant to come back. And the good news is that we are actively planning for offering them a opportunity to be educated by the Attleboro Public Schools differently than what we're planning for the majority of people. And so that's really where we are, is working out how do we create the conditions in which when it's safe enough for them to come to school, they can come to school and learn. And when we have to, on the drop of a hat, we're going to switch to hybrid or remote so that we can maintain the learning, but keep people safe. So that's my best summary of what's expected of us and where we are. And in the weeks to come, we will be able to describe that in greater detail, and as a community, make a decision about what makes the most sense for the first day of school.
Any questions or comments for the superintendent on that, Mr. Geddes?
Sorry, struggling to find the mute button. Thank you, Mr. Sawyer, because I too have heard a lot of those same concerns and share some of those concerns. And I know that we are waiting for guidance from the state, but a couple of questions or ideas that had come to me. For one, and again, knowing that this is very much up to the state, so we have very little leeway for flexibility. A couple of questions or thoughts that I had. One, is there any way that families might be able to choose their modality if the state says that we should fully reopen with restrictions, as you said?
Yeah, so just if I can jump in right here, just to clarify, that's what I'm talking about, where families are going to get to make this choice. And it's a binary choice. either you're comfortable to come back and go with us as a group into the various stages back and forth as needed, right? That's one choice. Or if you're not comfortable with that, you can be remote entirely as a separate option, right? We can't logistically have those two options coexist with one group of kids. So the students who opt to go remote full-time from the start are going to be getting one experience that is geared towards our best attempt to educate remotely. Then the other choice is to come back to school, assuming that it's safe to do so at the start, and then again, transition in between hybrid, remote, and in person as needed. But as a group, we're all doing that together based on the condition. So families will get to choose between those two options.
Thank you. And the other, like I said, I've got a lot of other questions that you won't be able to answer until we hear more from the state. But one other idea or thought that I had, if we are looking at a fully remote scenario from the state, and I know Ms. Regan is going to be talking about the calendar and some different models to potential changes that we may be seeing. But if we are looking at fully remote, would it be possible or beneficial for a half day or a full day at the beginning of the year for students to be in, just to have that initial interpersonal contact, then go remote? Or would it be better to just wait until October or November or whenever we're allowed fully in person?
If I understand your question, I think for the people who know that they want to be remote under any circumstance, I don't think we'll be bringing them in at all, because many of them, again, it's not safe for them to congregate with other people. So I think for the people who choose the full remote all the way, that there isn't going to be a chance to bring them back. For the other group, as I said, we don't really know what to expect for the start of school yet, because we're too far out and the conditions can change too quickly. But our hope is that, given how the transmission rates are currently, I think there's reason to hope that we will get a chance to bring people in person, to start the year, to build relationships, to get a strong foundation, so that as things unfold and we need to go to either hybrid or remote, we've established the norms that'll help us to get through all of that.
I just want to say, I know a lot of families are anxious about it. I know my family is anxious about it. And we go back and forth on what we would prefer. And so hopefully the state can come down with something sooner rather than later, so families can plan accordingly.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you guys. Unless there is a widespread statewide surge in the virus, I don't think there's going to be anything from the state other than in person. I think what they're trying to do is to, rather than have a statewide response, have it be a local response. So if a community has an experience like Chelsea did, that community can respond, quickly and appropriately to do what's safe there. But there were communities out in the western part of the state who had virtually no cases, and the way we handled it in the spring, they were shut down completely when that probably wasn't necessary, the way it was in other parts of the state. So I think the state's trying to move away from a statewide response to a localized response based on the conditions there.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mr. Hill?
Thanks so much. And Dave, thanks so much for all of your great thinking and planning here as it's getting going. Could you clarify too, just on your last point and as it relates to everything, in terms of what is the local decision-making power in this whole thing? I have two questions, but that was my first one.
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I'd love to have that answered for me. Because depending on the day, I think it feels a little bit different in terms of how much authority we really have. So the last time that this was discussed at the state level, the message I received was that the guidance is not a recommendation. The guidance is should be treated like regulation because it's being given as an executive order from the state level as part of us being in a state of emergency. So we don't have any power to say we don't have to wear masks for example. But it gets a little bit gray in terms of whether or not we get to say as a community, you know what? What's best here is to go hybrid or to go remote or to be in person. I don't know whether we really ultimately get to say that or whether the state is going to dictate to that us. Because initially it sounded more like the state was going to tell us to be in person and then we had to convince them to be in some different condition. But in the last month, as things have unfolded and the reactions to what was coming out of the state has been playing out, I feel like it's more likely that we have more control over that was being communicated originally. But another component to this that's very important is that our local health officials absolutely have the ability to pull the plug on anything that they don't think is safe. So that's a whole separate component of this. That's why we're really excited to have them involved right on the ground floor of our planning. We want them to understand what we're trying to do, and we want to understand how they're going to look at things so that we're on the same page about whether or not the conditions locally require us to take action or not.
That's great. And certainly, I think what you're saying makes total sense. And I guess, as Attleboro is a border community with another state, I mean, it would make sense in my mind to have some flexibility from the state as things go forward. My second question was just about big picture criteria. As you're saying, the decision obviously hasn't been made. You're developing the plans. Have you thought about your team thought about criteria if you have local control?
Yes.
What are the criteria for the different models and when they would be implemented?
So the state has released some criteria about specific scenarios, like, if somebody reports to school with a fever, things like that. So they're starting to get a little bit more into the details. And again, those will be things that we have to follow. But in terms of making that decision sort of globally for the community, we were having that discussion today, with our public health officials. One of the things that we learned that was not the most comforting piece of information was that they've received no guidance from the Department of Health at the state level. So they told us today that from their perspective, the state hasn't given them permission to reopen the schools, which was a very surprising message considering what the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is saying. So we're doing some looking into that at the state level to see whether the left hand is talking to the right hand up at the state level to help us out with that. But assuming that that'll sort itself out, we were talking about that very thing. And I think the biggest metric the metric that matters the most in this particular context is the transmission rate. So, right now it's under 2% statewide. And we know that, I think it's John Hopkins that has set, 5% is that like critical measure. So I don't know at what number we're going to agree that an Attleboro is too high. But I do know that that's one of the critical numbers that we will be watching and using to make that decision. And we'll certainly be communicating ahead of time when we figure out what ranges are acceptable to us. But the current range of under 2%, if that holds, I think the health experts would tell us that that's safe enough to send people back to school.
Superintendent Sawyer, who's in those meetings that you started today? You said the health department for the city was there. Yes. I assume it's going to continue going forward as we gear towards trying to be in school.
Yep. That's it. So it's the administration. We have administrators from each level represented. We have central office obviously is involved. Then we have AA leadership, and they again have participation from a range of their stakeholders. We have our district nurse, and then we have the health department.
So this city administration isn't participate. They're not part of it at all.
No, but certainly the mayor and I are in contact about what's going on to make sure that our policies match. Not unsimilar to several of the other things that have been going on citywide.
Mhm.
So we're keeping him involved, but no, he's not involved in a particular committee.
Thank you. Mr. Larson?
I just want to go back to one of the topics you were on before. Assuming that we are back to school full-time with restrictions, and I understand there are going to be some families that decide not to come back, and we're going to offer them a slightly different version of education, but something that can be done remotely at home. At what point, my concern is that there's going to be two different educations going on conceivably for the same grade. Are we gonna at some point during the year open it back up so that the people that are at home, if they want to return to school, or and I'm not looking for an answer right now, but I guess I'm thinking that somewhere down the road, we're going to need to let people know that if they choose to stay home, that's fine. We'll provide them an education, but because they're not going to be getting the same education that the kids in the classroom are actually getting, it may be difficult at some point in the year to have them come back to the in-person classroom because they won't be in the same place, would be my concern. So I guess, and again, I'm not looking for a firm answer right now, but I guess in the planning and maybe in the questionnaire, we can let them know that if they choose to stay home, they may be home for the entire year, or we may bring them back mid-year or at the end of a trimester, or whatever the case, whatever we decide.
Yeah, so actually I can say quite a bit about that, but with the caveat, and I probably will bore us to death if I remember to say this with everything, which I probably should, which is that I'll tell you what's true today, and we all have to acknowledge that things change pretty quickly, and sometimes what seemed right at the moment isn't for long. But as we sit here now, and because we've talked about this very issue, because I think you're absolutely right, this is a pretty significant one. I want to be very clear that we have a responsibility to educate all kids, and we want them back in person. So if somebody chooses to go remote initially and decides that for whatever reason they want to make a change, they will be allowed to do that at any point during the year. We can't, and we don't have the ability to say no to them, right? So it's like, it's not even an option. That being said, I have two things to comment on that. One, there is no reason to believe that the conditions that we're operating under here now facing the fall are going to be any different throughout this school year. I do not think that we're going to wake up to a day in which we can return to school without restrictions in the next school year. We're going to next June, we're going to be in the same place. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of people who wake up one day and say, oh, the virus is gone. I can send my kids back now. Whatever reasons you have for not wanting to do that now, I think those reasons are going to still be here all the way through the school year. But people certainly can feel differently, right? People can have a different response. People can certainly wake up one day and say, you know what, I feel differently about this now and I want to make a change. So we will allow for that. But to your point, because the full-time remote option is a different experience that we're going to be offering with the people who are willing to ride in-person, hybrid, remote as necessary. And so when you wake up one day and say, I want to no longer do remote and I want to go back to school, you might as well feel like that's like switching school districts, to your point, right? Like you're not going to be able to keep the same schedule that you had. You're not going to have the same teachers. You're not going to be exactly in the same place in the curriculum. That's not logistically possible. For us to do right by the kids who want to be remote, we've got to have that be much more individualized. And that's going to mean that they're going to be in different places, which means that if they want to come back, they're not coming back to where they were. They're going to have to plug into where the rest of everybody is. And that's going to be a difficult transition. a transition that we have the responsibility of helping families through. And so anyone that chooses to do that, they have the right to do that, and we will work with them through that transition. But anyone who thinks that they're going to be able to just, wake up tomorrow and jump right into going to a completely different mode, that's just not going to be possible.
Yeah, I think that's just a message that we need to make sure that people have, so that they're not thinking something completely different, that, there's two parallel lines tracking each other. And so.
Yep, I agree.
Thank you.
Mr. Domenici?
Thank you, Chairman. And Bill, thank you for asking that question, because I had a couple of questions and concerns, and that's one of them. And Dave, thank you for that answer. To me, and I understand the logistics are going to be difficult, but we could, I know that the administration will do their best to make sure the experience is as good for all kids as possible, whether they're in person, some variation of a hybrid, or remote. I also think it's important to note that while personally, I think you may find that there are families that may want to phase their kids in and have a comfort level that schools are open and things are still looking good. The numbers are still bearing out that we are taking the precautions, and then they have that comfort level to bring their kids in school. I would not be surprised if that happens. I would also not be surprised if after a certain period of time, in-person instruction with restrictions becomes a challenge for students that may ultimately end up being better suited remotely, because it is not going to be the same experience. So I think it's important to have that flexibility, and I think that you are doing your best to figure that out. The other question that I had, there was a small touching upon this in terms of, the decision-making process and who gets to determine, if we have to shut things down or things like that. The state is kind of putting a lot of the emphasis on local districts to have more authority over that. Mine was more of a financial piece. I've had this conversation with a few folks. Things like this can challenge the socioeconomic inequities that we see in a school district. Attleboro is certainly one that would fall into that variety. As much as we know, for example, that grades 1 through 12 are going to have Chromebooks, for example, which is a milestone that is almost insignificant in a lot of ways right now with everything else we're dealing with, but may be important, especially going full remote. There are students who may not, despite having a Chromebook, may not really have the ability to have internet, or they're in closed quarters and the like. So I guess my point to this, and maybe Mr. Furtado will touch on this a bit when we get more of the budget update, so I won't necessarily ask a question. My concern is the cost of doing business, to not only for in-person with restrictions, because there's a cost that comes with having equipment and having rooms set up in a way that keeps people safe, but also perhaps the cost of doing business if we have to go full remote or some variation. Do we know if there will be some additional funding provided to assist us in that endeavor? And I don't know if that's an answer you have now, if it's something that we can rely on, and whether or not that funding comes from the state, from federal, or even where we can from local contribution. So these are the things that I think about, along with Rob and everybody else on here who may have kids that are in the same boat about what we do in 5 weeks' time. But I just wanted to emphasize the point that the flexibility may need to go both ways in terms of kids coming into or leaving in-person instruction, and my concern about how we pay for the extra steps we need to take to keep people safe in an in-person instruction environment, students, teachers, and administrators alike.
So on the flexibility piece, I certainly appreciate the point that you're making. I will say that going from in-person to remote is a much easier transition than from remote to in-person.
Sure.
And we'll give some thought about what we're going to do about people who are hesitant to send them on the first day, but are after seeing that it works, are more willing to do so. We'll talk about what we can do to try to accommodate that transition. But I have to be honest, based on just the way schools are set up, it's going to be very hard for people who don't join us from the start to jump back in. So I appreciate the point that you're making, that we need to anticipate that there will be some who do that nonetheless. And as I've said, we're going to work with them to make it work as best we can under any circumstance, but we will certainly give that some thought. And in terms of the money, I'm sure Mr. Furtado can add to what I'm about to say, but there's definitely money. Whether it's enough, whether we can use it the way we want to, these are details that aren't always as clear as they should be. But there's quite a bit of money to help us. And, to your point, we've already spent quite a bit of money. And I have to say that the city deserves a lot of credit for choosing to spend its money in a way that has been very supportive of the schools. I've listened to other superintendents in other communities in which, the city, the community money that they got from the federal government through the state went not a penny to the schools, and all of it, was being used for other expenses in the city. And that has not been our experience. We've been very lucky that we were able to use those dollars on the devices so that we could take that cost out of the budget itself. So that's been a real boon for us. And there are other opportunities to spend money creatively from other sources than the operating budget to help us through this. We've applied for grants that are going to help us to provide internet access to families that don't have it, to address your concerns about equity. So there are opportunities, and it really comes down to whether or not the Chapter 70 money is close to what we need it to be or not. I mean, that ultimately is going to determine whether we can get through this year or not. And I participated in a call which gave me optimism for this particular year, that we're going to be okay budgetarily, but the sort of dark cloud that hang over that presentation was that what we really should be worried about is the following fiscal year. But obviously that's a concern for another day. Mark, would you add anything else to the financing piece of it?
Yeah, a couple of points. First of all, I would probably have an expectation that any support and aid would come from the federal government, as it has so far. The state is not going to have funds to provide support that way, and the city certainly isn't either. Just ballparking numbers, we've received close to $2.5 million of COVID related grants and support. We've spent close to $1 million of it already, between Chromebooks, PPE, desks and chairs. We had a lot of classrooms with tables, which are hostile to the classroom setup that we need to have to abide by DESE guidelines. So we've spent a significant amount of money to date, a lot of plexiglass for office space, and now we're working on plexiglass for classrooms and nurses' offices, especially for special needs programs. I'm happy to say that our PPE, per the DESE guidelines, is on site. It's been delivered, so we don't have any concerns in terms of starting school in that regard. We're told the desks will be in the district in the middle of September, so that's going to be a little bit of a challenge, but we'll see how that goes. As the superintendent pointed out, the problem is the tea leaves. We're going to be fine starting the school year, and I think we'll be fine getting through the school year. What happens after this year is a real concern, a big concern. And the other big question we have right now before we start is, as he said, transportation and how that's going to work. That may require us to change start times at schools. We're certainly going to be transporting differently. If it looks like guidelines are going to impact our ability to carry the numbers we usually carry, how do you make those choices? The people who critically need transportation may be fee-for-service people. How do you accommodate that? It's going to be a very difficult minefield to get through to start the year.
Just a quick follow-up, and Mark and Dave, thank you for those comments. I understand that some of the questions or concerns we bring up, there might not be a defined answer today, or it's a ever-evolving solution. The only other standpoint I wanted to bring up is that it may not just be families with students who may have concerns phasing in or flexing out one way or the other. I also think of our educators. If they feel that at such a time that they are no longer feeling comfortable or safe, that might be a concern as well. So I don't envy the task that you and your administration have with trying to balance all this out. But these are the types of concerns that we get. I'll speak for myself, but I can't imagine that any of my other colleagues on this call have not also received phone calls or messages or conversations, either from educators, from students themselves, or from families having concerns one way or the other. Yes, we have to open. No, I don't feel comfortable bringing my student in. So I really do appreciate that you are standing here and doing the best you can to answer the questions that we have. We have an abridged schedule during the summer, so there's a lot to be thrown out here in July. So thank you for that. And with that, I'm through with my comments.
One question I had, and I just fear it gets kind of lost in our current reality, I guess now, is that there's been such a wave and a culture shift in how we educate our students and how we try to educate our students. And I think it was something that Mr. Prado just said about getting desks and getting rid of tables that kind of struck me, in that this, even back in school with restrictions, seems like the collaborative learning is going to be really difficult to pull off. And so my question is, how are we going to deal with that? Because, ultimately it is still our obligation to educate the students as best as possible. So while we obviously have to think of the health concerns, we do need to be thinking of that as well. So knowing you, Mr. Sawyer, I'm sure you guys have thought about it and talked about it. I'm just curious to see where we are on that.
It's absolutely a big part of the problem, right? In many ways, education is taking a giant step backwards pedagogically as we put everyone in rows and make them all face the teacher. We have some real challenges, but we also have very, very, very talented educators, and with the technological tools that we're going to be having in much greater abundance. I'm optimistic that given some time to rethink how we approach this, we're going to be able to do some things in ways that weren't obvious to us as we started, that help us to get to that place. Because I don't think we're going to land in a place where teachers decide that the way to handle this problem is to just stand and deliver for an entire period. They don't want to do that any more than the kids want to experience it, or their administrators want them to do so. So this is why, this is a major undertaking. And, one of the things that we're going to talk about a little bit later is that we really need some time to work with teachers to sort all this out. But I know that Ms. Regan is also going to touch on some of these issues when she gets more into the learning components of these plans.
Thank you. Any other questions for Superintendent Sawyer on this issue? All right, I don't see any.
So then I'm going to move on and turn it over to Ms. Singer, who's going to give a little bit of an update on personnel and HR.
Good evening. Thank you, Superintendent Sawyer. Just two quick things. As the superintendent mentioned, the survey going out again to families at some point in the near future. We will also be doing a staff survey to go out, excuse me, early next week. Just again, in preparation for the upcoming year, trying to get an indication of staff's intention if we're back in person. Again, we have a lot of staff who have concerns for their own physical health, for conditions that they have. And so just kind of planning and trying to figure out who intends to come back and who might have concerns and how we can address those concerns prior to the start of the school year for planning purposes. So that will be going out at the beginning of next week. And then the other update I have, as you all know, this is a very busy season for us traditionally for hiring purposes for the following school year. And so we are still continuing with our hiring for positions that were budgeted for this school year originally. We have had quite a few additional retirements and resignations over the last couple of months. And so, replacing staff who have left continues to be ongoing. So those are the only two brief updates I have for you. Does anybody have any questions?
I don't see any.
Okay. Oh, wait, Scott.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry, I was having trouble muting for once. So Julianne, would you say just to confirm, is it abnormally high, or was this kind of expected considering what's going on?
For the resignations and retirements?
Yeah.
We have had some additional ones that we weren't anticipating, and I think those were due to people's uncertainty as to what's happening. Maybe they were already close to retirement, or life circumstances happened that just they felt like now is the time to move ahead with retirement at this point. The resignations were more due to just life circumstance, people's spouses moving, things like that. So we always get several of those in the summer months anyway. So I don't see that as any higher than it was before.
Okay, thank you. And I understanding like there's only so far you can go to give an explanation.
Yeah.
So I certainly don't want you to cross any lines there. It was a concern of mine, just in general, wondering how many educators might say, you know what, I was close and it's the risk is too high for me and I'm going to just do it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something we don't necessarily, maybe that plays out over another year. I mean, it's hard to do. Okay,
right.
Thank you.
Right, which is what the survey I think will also bring about some questions and more clarity for staff as to what their plans are moving forward.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. That's it for me.
Okay, then I will now turn it over to Ms. Medeiros to talk a little bit about special education.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Just a couple of updates on ESY. We have about 200 students participating in ESY. When we're on site, we have about sorry, my dog just decided to bark. We usually have about 235, 240 around there. So we're running a little bit, about 40 students or so, usually, less than if we were on site. And just as you were asking questions about families changing their minds, families have changed their minds. Some families who chose not to participate in remote, once we got started, they chose to participate. We've kind of worked with our staff to transition them in, their students in, and then families who said they wanted to participate in remote learning have decided to not participate for a variety of reasons. So they've transitioned out. So it's kind of been fluid a little bit. That also happens as if we were on site as well, depending on the circumstances and the whatever's going on in the family's life around that. Many times it has to do with staffing, particularly for our younger students. It's easier when the staff member the staff that typically work with students during the school year are working over the summer, or the staff is the staff that the student is going to work with in September if they're transitioning to a new grade level. So we've had many of our staff who work in our programs who typically don't work over the summer are working just to make that transition easier for students, and we've grouped students accordingly to make that happen. So I just wanted to clarify, because I know a lot of our surrounding communities have chosen to do some on-site in-person services. And many of our ATA districts still are not. Right now I have 2 programs open. I've basically 3 students participating in in-person services currently. And they just started this past week to open up in-person services. However, we took a lot of factors into our decision making and to continue with remote. One of the big factors was that we didn't receive guidance until June 1st from DESE regarding special ed services for the summer. That guidance is much more restrictive than the current guidance that's been released for the fall, which was just released on July 9th. So based on that, that was one of the factors. We also looked at, could we do some, DESE's guidance was always to start with remote and then plan for some possible in-person services based on student needs, the district, all of that, your community, all of that. So we had identified the high school students as a possibility to do some in-person ESY. My dog definitely threw me off tonight, so I apologize. Some in-person services just because of the number, the size of the building, our ability to spread students out. There are less students enrolled in ESY in grades 9 through 12. We thought we could meet the requirements. Parent feedback when we did our surveys was kind of, wishy-washy. They weren't like gung-ho to bring their kids in person. They were unsure at that time. So we decided, and then there was still a lot of questions between June 1st when they released their first set of guidance. And then they kept telling us we're going to issue some further guidance for summer services. That further guidance didn't come till July 1, and our ESY started on July 6th. So we kind of, used that. We also looked at, as a district, we provided, once we got the change in guidance from DESE back in April that we could provide direct services to kids and new curriculum, we went ahead and did that for many of our students. And again, we didn't take it as a broad approach. We did it student by student, program by program, working with the family depending on the circumstances for the families. So many of our students, even though the services were remote, were receiving small group, one-on-one services for speech, PT, OT, instruction, reading services, just depending on the student. Many of our surrounding communities were unable to do that for a variety of reasons. They decided to take the approach, which was approach that DESE allowed us to do and provided the guidance, which was to just provide resources and supports to families and not telepractice services and direct services. So every community has a different situation. So that's kind of how Attleboro approached it. So I wanted to let the public know that was kind of how we made our determination. We've determined to continue with remote services for a variety of reasons. But one of the main reasons is that we would still have many students whose families are not interested in having their kids come in person. That would then require us to hire additional staff. For special ed, we found that the staff, what works best for us is staff that kids know, especially for our most fragile students. So hiring staff that the kids don't know at this point, just to get some in-person services would be, I'm not sure if it would be beneficial for a speech person who's never met a student to come in and do 3 sessions of 30 minutes of in-person services at this point, when someone who does know the student could do that remotely, provide that service. So that's kind of how we determined that. As far as the fall guidance, we did receive on July 9th, some extensive guidance for special ed services for fall opening with a priority, with some criteria as to who to prioritize for some in-person services, whether we are, in person with restrictions, hybrid, or remote as a district. The way that we're approaching that guidance as a district is I'm meeting with myself and Katie, the assistant director, are meeting with the individual programs, the staff in those individual programs to really determine what's needed in those programs, what makes the most sense for those students. And then we think that, we've done a lot of surveys of our families. We think that we're going to put a survey together for special ed in particular, how families want their students to participate in the fall, but we think that we're going to distribute that by program, by the staff that knows the students. We think we're going to start that way to see if we get a better response. Some of our staff has already done one-on-one interviews with families, has an idea of the students in their program, which families are interested in participating. and which ones are not interested in participating. So that's how we're going to approach it moving forward versus making kind of a broad decision for special ed, but really taking it program by program, and then what makes sense within those buildings and for those families. So I don't know if you have any questions for me.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess we're ready now to hear from Assistant Superintendent Regan. She can talk a little bit about the plans for developing those three plans for the state. Plus, we got some calendars to talk about once again.
Okay, thank you, Superintendent Sawyer. So tomorrow morning, we'll be meeting with the Learning Task Force. We'll be putting together some initial dates to schedule so that we can meet by level to talk specifically about what the learning plans will look like. So for example, we'll need to talk about planning synchronous times and scheduling those throughout the day, meaning that if we were in a remote setting, teachers would schedule times for students to log on while at home. We would also be talking about asynchronous times where students would be able to watch a particular learning video from home at whatever time was convenient for them. We'll also be talking about our hybrid plan, where we'll be looking at different scenarios and different schedules and trying to determine what would be best educationally for our students, and putting all of those pieces together, as Superintendent Sawyer said earlier tonight, in under one plan so that we can seamlessly move between all three plans: in person with restrictions, remote, and hybrid. So any questions about our learning plans and our plans for that before I move on? One other thing I did want to mention before I got into the calendars is that Be Heard, our community engagement organization, is hosting a community conversation coming up this Wednesday night, July 22nd, from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Collaborating with several other organizations throughout the community. It's called Neighbors in Dialogue, Listening and Learning from Each Other. Reverend Cheryl Harris has trained several facilitators and will be leading large group and small group discussions. And the topic will be about racism and anti-racism. And so we do have about 70 people who have already registered to participate in the conversation, and we have a few spots left. So if you are interested and would like to register for the session, you can find the link on the Attleboro Public Library website. So any questions about that? Okay. And then finally, I did want to share with you 3 calendars about the start of the school year. So if I'm going to just share my screen for 1 minute, so bear with me. Okay, can everyone see the screen? Okay, this is the calendar that was originally approved on April 18th, 2019. It has the student start date on August 31st, as you can see here, and our end date is June 16th, 2021, with 180 days included in it. Let me grab the second calendar. The second calendar that I'm going to share with you, hold on 1 second. Okay, so the second calendar includes 180 days with the first day starting on August 31st, and then the subsequent days, August 31st through September 3rd, being all half days. And the reason why we're revisiting these calendars is because the state is considering reducing the number of calendar days that school districts across the Commonwealth are required to have. And so part of our planning for this is that we're waiting for the state to tell us if this is something that they are going to let us do. And so instead of waiting, we're preparing for this and coming up with a couple different scenarios that we wanted to share with you this evening. And so this is the second scenario, or actually this is the first scenario where we've created 4 half days starting on August 31st and having the last day be on June 16th, and we would still be in school for 180 days. These 4 half days would give us the opportunity to train teachers in particular things like some of the safety guidelines that the state has been providing to us. It'll also give us the opportunity to provide professional development for teachers in the use of different technologies that may be required during a remote or a hybrid setting. And it also give us the opportunity to make some connections with families and start to meet with our students as well. And then the final calendar. The final calendar is, this calendar will only be used and was crafted if the state does in fact reduce the 180-day requirement. And so this calendar right here is a 176-day calendar. It provides us with 4 full professional days starting on August 31st as the days that we would be meeting to talk specifically about this through September 3rd. And the last day would still be on June 16th, with the reduction in calendar school days from 180 to 176. And again, this is only if the commissioner does reduce the number of days for all of the districts across the Commonwealth. So we wanted to provide you with the options that we've been discussing tonight, and just let you know that we are preparing for whatever guidance the commissioner does provide us. Any questions about that?
Ms. Regan, when do you expect to have a decision or recommendation as to the calendar so families and staff can know?
So that's a good question. Again, it's contingent upon when the commissioner can provide us that guidance. And so we're waiting on him to be able to share if he's able to adjust the number of days required.
And have discussions started with the AEA?
I was talking over you. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Sawyer. You can go ahead.
I was just going to say that, one, we want to get this out there as an issue so the parents are aware, and that's why we're talking about it tonight. But, we're going to have to make a decision at our August meeting, whether we have a definitive answer from the state or not. We'll have to decide at that point what to do if they haven't given us that leeway. But, we wanted to bring to your attention that this is an issue that having time to prepare teachers, both in the safety protocols we'll need to have students in the building safely, but also to address the changes in what the expectations around learning will be. The normal 2 days at the beginning of the year are not going to be enough. So we're saying, we're hopeful that the state's going to do the right thing here and reduce the school year as they have talked about doing, but have yet to do so. And we want to plan for that and tell you what we think would be the right way to handle that if that's possible. But also to tell you that if it's not possible, then we are going to recommend that we go to half days because, we just think it's going to be unsafe to bring students into the building without having more time to get everybody ready for that.
So this would be increasing the number of professional development days or hours. So have discussions with the AEA begun, or has it been broached with them?
We discussed this today at our reopening committee meeting, but it's important to note that this is part of the MTA's proposal. There would be a phased in start of school, and this is part of that phasing, is to have more time for PD before kids are in the building. So the MTA is endorsing that, and then the AEA has let us know that their membership has strongly endorsed that approach. So we anticipate that being a bargaining position when we get to the table with them.
Thank you. Any other questions, Ms. Johnson?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So one question that I have is regarding snow days, and I suspect that the answer is going to be that we're still waiting on this information from the state. But in the world of remote learning, if students decide to choose that path, or families decide to choose that path for their students, would snow days be a thing for them or not necessarily? And I know in the past we had hoped that the state would allow some sort of snow bag or remote learning for snow days. And I know that has been put on this, or was put on the shelf for a period of time. So I wonder if you had any insider information from the state as of yet, or is this still to be determined?
Still to be determined. There's been no mention of it. You know, one of the joys of living on the state line is that whenever Rhode Island has a good idea, you know, everybody is hopeful that Massachusetts is going to follow suit.
Sure.
Unfortunately, Massachusetts doesn't deign to follow Rhode Island in too many things. So I don't know that there's cause for hope on this one. I happen to agree with those who believe that Rhode Island's got this one right. But I do think what complicates it is that the state had its knuckles wrapped on the snow bag issue, especially in how it plays out for students with disabilities. So I think there's a little bit more of a complication in terms of Massachusetts following suit. So certainly we'll be pressing for some clarity on that. For the students who are in the full remote all year, I don't really think it's a concern for them. But for the rest of us, hopefully they'll give us that flexibility.
So if I could just follow up, am I hearing you say that you think that those students that may go full remote, they essentially wouldn't have snow days? Or is that still, you know?
The only thing that would get in the way of them not having a snow day is that, do we really want them to be on a different schedule than everybody else? That would be the only reason.
Yep, that was my concern as well. Thank you very much.
Any other questions on this? Mr. Geddes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Regan, just to clarify, with the September 8th start, you had said that the professional development days for educators would start on the 31st. You were just referencing the additional COVID-related training days. The PD and academic year for the educators would still start on August 26th, correct?
Correct. Yes. Thank you for catching that. The educator year would start on August 26th, and then the actual training to prepare for the opening of school would happen starting on August 31st. Thank you for that.
No problem. And I may have missed this in your initial comments, but are you looking for us to make a motion to approve all three calendars contingent on what the state guidance is, or do you want us to wait until August and then approve an updated calendar?
So I believe the recommendation was to wait until August. This will be a decision that we need to make then. We're just waiting for more guidance. If the state is able to give us, is able to reduce the number of days, then that will help in our decision-making process. But right now, we're just looking at all of the different options that we have available to us.
Just to piggyback on that, Ms. Regan's right. I think, you know, we'll have to take this up in August, but the idea tonight was first to let the committee members know the different possibilities and the reasons behind it, and also to let the public know and, you know, get the word out there that there are possible changes to the start of the school year. And then, you know, that gives us time as well to converse with the public as to concerns with the different options. But we will not be bringing forward a motion on it tonight. Any other questions? Mr. Domenici?
Maybe more of a clarification than a question, although with me, you never know, I guess. It seems as if like what we've seen tonight, and Lori, I know we've seen the calendars earlier, but it seems like we have a current calendar that we all agreed on, but what's likely is that one way or the other, we're voting on a new calendar. Is kind of what I'm getting. So if there isn't a reduction in days, the recommendation is going to be, can we do the half days versus, you know, a reduction in days, then here's the option. So I think in one way, shape or form, folks should be planning that there is going to be at least some adjustment to the school calendar. Unless you tell me that there's a likelihood that we stay put with what we have already agreed on. It sounds to me like we are going to, in fact, have a change. It's just, we don't know which one yet.
Correct. And the two distinct changes are that in the 180-day calendar, if the commissioner does not provide us with a reduction of days, the first day will start on August 31st for students, and that first week will be a half day every single day. If the commissioner does provide us with a reduction in school days, then the first day will be on September 8th. And that first week will be full day professional development for teachers.
Thank you. I just think it's important, if anybody is watching tonight and when this gets ultimately shared, that parents should be prepared that there is going to be a slight shift in the calendar one way or the other. So.
Right. I agree. And I would also say that it kind of piggybacks on something that Mr. Sawyer said for the last several meetings. And as a parent of two students who are in the school district can be, frustrating, is that I think parents and teachers and students just have to be prepared for a multitude of possibilities, that we really don't know what's going to happen come late August, early September. And we don't know when that happens, how long it's going to last. As we saw this spring, it's, right now is not our normal reality. So we just have to be as prepared as we can for various situations, as hard as that is and as difficult as that makes, other aspects of our lives. I think that's just the reality. I think this calendar is just another example of that. Mr. Hill?
If there's no relief given on the 180 days, is it possible and is it worthwhile to consider a later start, the August, I guess also need to know, is MCAS happening? And that the August date, I think, was originally put in to get more days to do MCAS. So would love some thought there and some clarification.
Yeah, something definitely worth thinking about if we find out definitively that we can't change anything.
So that's something the administration is going to be considering as well then?
Yeah, I think everything's on the table based on what they tell us, right?
Is
Mr. Hill?
Sorry, is MCAS still on the table, right, as for this year coming up now?
The last time someone asked about it, it was the question was answered with a laugh. So I took that to mean that it's a little bit premature.
Anyone else? No? Anything else, Mrs. Regan?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, then I now think it's Mr. Furtado's turn to tell us a little bit about where we ended in 20 and what to expect in 21.
Thank you, Superintendent. I am very happy to report we are practically dead on to where we said we would be. We were fortunate enough to have the city agree to pay for March to June transportation on the basis of the agreements we reached with our vendors. That was a very positive thing for us, very positive thing for the vendors. So we, as we're sitting here today, are at about 1.13 million in surplus that will go back to the city. We still have some encumbrances to close out, and we'll be very close to the 1.2 million we speculated on in finance. So somewhere between 1.1 and 1.2, more towards the 1.2 when all is said and done. So FY20 ended pretty much as predicted, no surprises. I think that's going to help the city in a big way in terms of dealing with whatever comes out of the state for 21. So very happy about all of that. Regarding 21, we have our approved budget and we are operating under our approved budget. The state has, identified a 1/12 budget for the month of July at the state level, which includes support to municipalities and schools. There is a lot of talk about them doing it again in August. So we'll see what happens, but the city is in a position to certainly address those shortfalls, and hopefully whatever goes beyond that when they finally reach a budget agreement. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about financial matters.
Mr. Larson?
Mark, because people won't understand sometimes when we throw some numbers around, but the 1.130 to the 1.2 is the combined surplus, if I remember correctly. Is that correct?
Yes, transportation and net school spending operating. The transportation is 2/3 to 3/4 of that.
That's what I think that's important for people to understand, that, a lot of that, a large part of the surplus was created because we didn't transport kids for, the better part of 3 years.
Yeah.
So, it's from an operations point of view, if I remember, we were ballparking a surplus of between $500,000 and possibly $600,000 at the most.
Yeah, we're a little under 5 right now.
A little under 5. Okay. So that's kind of where we thought we were going to be.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Any other questions for Mr. Furtado? Mr. Domenici?
Mark, just a quick one, and it seems a little inconsequential at this point in time, but do you know if have the roof projects started at the middle school?
They have. We're ripping and tearing. They started at Brennan. Specifically, the contractor, the roofer, had a lot of concerns about some fundamental design and structural issues that they encountered in doing some of their testing. And then the first day or two up on the roof, they found a whole bunch more that really had really brought them some concern. So they are, working with Bar to figure out what the design responses are to these things. That it's hard to explain, but they we had some flashing in the building that wasn't secured to anything, which almost makes it useless, and so they had to figure out a way to build a structure to secure new flashing to, completely out of the scope of the project. But again, they're finding a lot of things that weren't done back when the building was built. So they are going to school on Brennan. I don't anticipate them starting at Wamsutta until early August at best. But at Brennan, they're about 50% of the roof is off right now. And they'll be done very quickly at Brennan once they do the engineering required to address the structural issues that they're finding. Wamsutta will be a bit more of a challenge only because of the shrinking timeline. It's probable that that's going to go into September a little bit, but nothing profound. And as we keep telling our OPM, it's vitally important that this get done right rather than early, because we simply don't want to be back where we were. So we're trying to, you can't say to a vendor, take your time, because that'll be a disaster. But we're just trying to balance a prudent and thorough approach to the roof with the time we have to do it. But if you go by Brennan, you'll see a bare roof.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Okay, then I will just conclude by
Thank you.
saying,
And I guess progress on the floors at elementary schools.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
I apologize. My internet got a little unstable there, so everybody froze. I didn't know if we also, I guess just as a follow-up number 2, as to whether or not we had any news on Hill Roberts, Hyman Fine, gym floors. Again, I know it's a little inconsequential with everything else going on, but we had a pretty aggressive timeline for some of these projects. So I didn't know if any of those would have an impact on some of those schools starting.
We have the contracts for the folks who are going to be doing what essentially is the mitigation of the material in the buildings. Again, that's going to probably, because of everything else going on, is going to probably spill over into a little bit, but we're going forward with that work as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Furtado. Ms. Johnson, did you have a question? Okay. Anyone else?
Okay, then I will conclude by saying that as far as the state budget for FY21, I think it's pretty safe to say, and I should pause here to say that my perception of this is really informed by the great communication that we're getting from our local delegates. Our local delegates, they do a great job of keeping us informed and taking the time to make sure that we know what's going on. But the perception here is that the state is not going to pass a budget until the feds decide how they're going to handle the next round of support. So I think it's pretty safe to say that we're going to continue to operate the way we have been since July 1 until there is action at the federal level. And then depending on how that goes, we're going to determine if we have any issues in this fiscal year or not. So I think the state will act very swiftly once that information is clear to them. So unless there are any questions about that, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Sawyer. Next on our agenda tonight, we just have a brief executive session update. No motion is going to be required, but I just wanted to notify the committee that pursuant to the open meeting law, Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 22G1, as chair of the school committee, I have recently reviewed the minutes of the school committee's executive sessions from June 1st, 2018 to June 30th, 2020. After review, I determined that all the minutes remain subject to non-disclosure, as publication would defeat the lawful purposes of the executive sessions. In accordance with the open meeting law, I will conduct another review of the executive session minutes within a reasonable interval. So that concludes that report. Next, we have our minutes from our June 29th, 2020 meeting. The minutes were circulated with your materials. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or edits? No, I don't see any. Okay, then Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mrs. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Minutes pass. Next, we have open forum. Is there anyone here who would like to address the committee at open forum? The only attendee I see is Mr. Amaral, who indicated earlier he was just viewing the meeting. So I will close open forum. And finally, the Attleboro School Committee will convene an executive session pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Sections 21A, 2, and 3 to discuss strategy with respect to negotiations with union personnel and to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining, as an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the school committee. Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Withers, yes. Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Hill.
Yes.
All right, thank you. We'll see everyone in executive session. Ms. Singer sent the Zoom link this afternoon / evening, so everyone should have it. And I will see you in that room in just a moment.